So Nsume Gant, who is the resident director, producer, artist, filmmaker, teacher, educator, activist, all the things. So can you talk about, so I'd like you to start with the history of propaganda with regard to film, TV, and how this all kind of came into play.
Hello everybody, how y'all doing? Good to see you folks. I'm kind of mad I wasn't able to get into the early discussions. It seems like there's been a great room and great energies here. I'll do my best to kind of give a focused history to a certain degree. I can't give an exhaustive history. I can touch on a few earlier points and then I can kind of tunnel in on a few things. One of the things that people have to remember with things like film, which then led to things like television, is film was a technological expedition by very rich people in the Industrial Revolution and the coming, the competing powers trying to make new technology, so forth and so on in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. People like the Lumiere brothers and Thomas Edison, who are, constantly given these kind of really big props for being inventors, were also big capitalists. They were people with lots of money who were trying to use the image to paint a certain picture of their nations. Lumiere would be France, Edison would be the United States, and they had a vested interest in creating images about their nations that were, powerful and so forth and so on. So, one of the things that I show my students is Lumiere brothers. One of their probably lesser talked about early films is their workers all coming out of the factory, right? And if you see the image of all the workers coming out of the factory, they're all smiling and having a good time and everything is great and hunky-dory. But of course, we also know in that time you have labor movements, you have strikes, you have everything happening at that time in France, especially. So, the idea that people are walking out of a factory all, happy every day is complete BS. Anyway, we keep going. Now, as film keeps developing, and becomes more of a tool to kind of develop what we would call now mass media and, creating mass culture, you have films like Birth of a Nation in 1915, which begin to kind of create these kind of epic stories, the images of kind of the orders of society, right? And then you have a thing called the talkies that begin to develop, meaning when sound sync happens with film. That happens in like the 20s, going into the 30s, so forth and so on. And you begin to kind of create these mythologies to kind of deem, and in the 30s are very interesting because the 30s, is a time where, you have gangster films, people like Paul Mooney, but you also have cops and stuff like that. And, you have like the Roaring 20s, all these things that they're trying to figure out. But as time goes on, there becomes more of a vested interest to use cinema as a thing to teach people and to kind of get the size of what you want culture, dominant culture to talk about. Because cinema early on was a thing that was seen to be very, it wasn't seen to be a thing that of high culture, right? People with big money, they were interested in still going to the theater. And as time went on, World War II is another big, moment, things changed. But you get into like the 50s, post-World War, and you have to start to begin to kind of create a landscape where they want to create certain types of ideologies for the culture, right? And things like America being the great place, because they had that other thing at the other side of the world called the Soviet Union, which they were now in a big competition with over the ideology of the minds of people, not just here in the US, but globally. So they had to begin to develop, certain ideologies. And things like police were definitely a part of the iconography of American culture, law, order, right? And one of the big things that people in the USSR always would say, or communist or Marxist people would say is, laws in America are about private property, right? And things like that, which I do agree with, right? And the development of laws. And America wanted to kind of obfuscate the idea of what law is, right? They wanted to make law natural, right? We have law because people are, inherently suspicious, or you have a communist who might live he might be your next door neighbor, or someone might be trying to steal something from you. The idea that human beings have these kind of fallible things, and the laws that America has set up are there to kind of help us kind of get through the negatives, right? And law has been like this kind of bottom line of goodness, and almost like a litmus test of someone's worthiness in society. So I think that in 1967, I'm going to mention a movie that many people know about, becomes very big for Black people, and the Black kind of quest through American civilization. This movie's called In the Heat of the Night, starring Sidney Poitier, right? And that's a film where a Black man plays a police officer, and he's a police officer investigating a crime based on race in the Deep South. He's brought up from Philadelphia. And in this film, Poitier is used to show a dignified Black man upholding the laws of the U.S., right? And that Black people actually have the possibilities of being, the greatest things that America can be because of some, dignified nature within him. And because he can kind of go to the American, standard, he is thus someone that America should respect. Which, in 67, we're also thinking about the things that are happening when we're about a year before Martin Luther King is assassinated, 2 years after Malcolm has been assassinated. You have the Black Panthers about to come about. You have Black Power, Kwame Ture, all this type of stuff. They need a new kind of mechanism to kind of also fight against this idea of revolution that is actually becoming global. And Poitier, wittingly or unwittingly, I don't want to really get into that right now, becomes an agent of that, right? And then, the 70s becomes a very challenging time. You have a lot of films that kind of play both sides, things like Shaft, right? You have movies like Top of the Heat, which few people have seen, which can challenge the idea, can a Black man ever be a cop, so forth and so on. You have revolution happening all over the globe, right? And there's so much unrest. There's an idea that, a lot of things are happening, but and film also plays with it a little bit. 70s is a very complicated time in the movie industry. But you really got to kind of fast track to the 80s when you're really thinking about like hardcore propaganda. And Black people, I have to say, Black movie stars have played a significant role in it. In 1984, you have two movies, Beverly Hills Cop, right? Eddie Murphy, right? Movie that I still to this day will watch and laugh my butt off. But that is a very, very, very challenging movie. Another movie, really beautiful, remember this. He did 40, but he was, 82. Yeah, he was the criminal, right. Working with the cops, exactly. 84 is another movie that many people don't remember. It's called Fatal Beauty, starring Whoopi Goldberg, right? She played a cop as well, right? People don't realize Whoopi's played quite a few cops in her movie, right? In her movie career, she's played quite a few cops. And in the 80s, you see this ramp up, right? Yeah, what Jared is bringing here about Eddie Murphy, his first movie role, 48 Hours, playing the criminal to Nick Nolte's cop is also deep in its own self. Matthew Diawara has a great essay on that, where he talks about, he compares it actually to Birth of a Nation, how he taking Eddie out, right? It's a great essay, and it tracks, right? It's like I said, it's like the Gus Chase scene. They allow Eddie to kind of move around, do his thing, act belligerent to the white people, and then Nick Nolte has to constantly slap him back in line, right? When he steals the gun, he slaps him. They get into the fight. Who gets the last punch? Nick Nolte. Right, he wins the fight, calls him the N-word a few times in the film, and at the end of the movie, what does Eddie Murphy do? He thanks him. Mm-hmm. He says, "You're my friend," and he goes back to jail. Yeah. Oh yeah. They made a sequel, and he actually gets out of jail eventually. He's still his friend. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? But then in 1987, you have another big film. You have Lethal Weapon, Danny Glover, right? And this is a film with Mel Gibson, right? And you have this film where the kind of Manichaean world, the 80s are definitely, not just in Black movies, in movies altogether, this idea that the world is hostile, it's crazy. You have lots of movies about cops and the singular cop who fights the crazy people and keeps everything away, and they have to use excessive brute force. Movies like Die Hard. I mean, go through 80s movies. They make you think that, and I grew up in the 80s. They make you think that the world at large is dangerous, it's wicked, it is crazy. You better be happy you have cops around. Because if not, people will be kidnapping your children, right? Infesting your water with drugs and all types of stuff. It would just be horrible, right? But Danny Glover is another person. He plays a role in this, right? In Lethal Weapon, which is a very, very intense film, right? And like intense about the world. Also like the ills of like of Vietnam already, like the drug trade. I mean, they really like to put a lot of weird things about history, about actual history in these movies, right? Die Hard's another one, right? About actual history, about, people who hijack, but then like obfuscate it, right? Make people who are doing these things unprincipled, or they don't really care about anything. It's all about money and so forth and so on, and it's pretty dastardly. But then you go on, and if you look at the careers of people like Denzel Washington, I mean, Denzel, more than half of his career is playing cops and military men.
Mm-hmm.
Period. Right? He continues to do that. And that, to now, Queen Latifah on television playing a cop, right? List the actor, list the black actor, and they have played a cop, right? And they play this in a way where they are the soul of what the true American ideal is, right? What? Lawful, obedient, obeys the rules, believes in democracy, but has to also uphold it with an iron fist. So if it goes a little offhand, like, maybe they assault someone, it's because, they really care. Right? And this is how this thing kind of goes. And it's a very quick overview. I mean, the thing with black people, though, there's someone, I forget who the scholar was, but he talked about how people in marginalized, marginalized communities, when they put them into things like film and television and media and representation, they like to put them into these authority. There was another big thing for a while, I think in the late 90s, where they had black men constantly playing high school principals, right? And this idea that, they need to be an authority. And the reason why they like those kind of authority figures is because to be authority in that, you have to be obedient to the societal status quo, right? So the status quo can then be transmitted through someone who's not white, right? And that's extremely important for empire, right? Because, look, white people saying this is what's right all the time can get a little tired. And, black people, Latino, be like, I don't know about that. But Denzel Washington or Whoopi Goldberg, in a laughing way, is telling you this. Maybe you go, what this is, maybe we shouldn't be doing it. Maybe we should be thinking about revolution, right? So forth and so on. And another thing, there's also like some other films like, I forget the film, the TV movie with where they falsely tell Jaleel Mujakim's story. You know this film, right? Me and Horace Burner talked about this movie. The TV with James Woods and Yaphet Kotto.
Oh, wow, right.
Yeah, they did a film, Jaleel Mujakim with the Black Liberation Army. They did a film, completely unfactual and BS, about like hunting him down, right? And Yaphet Kotto, who I loved watching for years. Yaphet Kotto plays one of the stars of this film. And it's a film that is really about making revolution seem like an unprincipled thug act, right? And him and James Woods, of all racist people, Yaphet Kotto goes on and catches, Jaleel Mujakim and his band of, black thugs who want to, take out people, right? So it continues. The Watchmen TV show that came on recently with Regina King, right? There is a continuance of using this kind of imagery, these kind of archetypes, to use black people as a way to funnel in status quo ideas about American society, American ideology, as being fundamentally what black people should actually be about. And it doesn't stop with black people too. We all know that. We know the same time with our Latin people, you know what I'm saying? for South Asian people, it continues on and on and on. But that's like a brief thing. I mean, there are probably other things I can say and we can see in the conversation, but that's a brief overview.
So I know, but y'all got a history lesson. This is why I brought them. So that you can get history. I like Jared, so I intentionally picked this crew because Ntume can cover the movies and TV, and Jared has been in independent media, radio for so long that he has tracked this personally and how the propaganda has worked through the media channels, whether independent or not. So Jared, if you could also talk a little bit about how propaganda has worked through media enterprises, radio, television, news, that type of thing.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Greetings, everybody. Did it go on? No, it's okay. Yeah, just why did it sound louder? Well, first, before I forget, there are a couple things. It's simple. Well, the entire media system in this country and its entire purpose for communicating has been a version of propaganda, imperial suppression, and colonization from jump, and they've been very clear about this. So all so-called independent communicative efforts are, from the perspective of those in power, unsanctioned and targeted for suppression, distortion, erasure. But what I wanted to just quickly add to this great history we just got is that sort of running parallel to this are I think it's Patricia Bradley's great book called, from years ago, from the 80s actually, I think, talking about propaganda and slavery. It's called Propaganda and Slavery. Where what I would, in terms of this conversation, consider this early stages of propaganda, because the point that she's pointing out in this book was that the so-called founding fathers and settlers of this country rebranded the term slavery for their conversation as a descriptor of what was happening to them by the British, not what they were doing to Africans here. And immediately started to use the press and forms of communication. My man, Dr. Todd Stephen Burrows, Newark representative, just unable to be here tonight, years ago showed me that one of the first pieces of propaganda was to make Crispus Attucks white in the early Paul Revere press coverage of the so-called Boston Massacre, because obviously you're not going to get poor whites to fight rich whites because they killed a black man. It's like, that's not motivational. So they rebranded it. So when Paul Revere is doing his ride and he's spreading the word, he's carrying a message of the Boston Massacre that features the assassination of a white Crispus Attucks so that he could encourage whites to fight whites. All of this emerges, this initial, I think, purpose emerges, and then later we would see when Herbert Aptheker does his work on Negro slave revolts, that the press, as he called it, was used as a mechanism of control to first justify the enslavement of Africans, but then also to raise fears of their freedom, what that might mean, and then, of course, to raise fears among other whites about the escape attempts and the rebellion. So my point being, the press was used from the very beginning to justify enslavement, exploitation, and then to justify the violent police and military suppression of those groups who might want to be free from that. So that's why we see these incestuous relationships between the ruling elite and the establishment of a private police force, the Pinkertons up north, and et cetera, to wipe out labor organizers, and to hire poor whites to enslave to police the enslaved property of the rich whites. And then to produce a propaganda that justifies all of this. Of course we have to have a private police force to police these union workers and people who want equal pay and to not have their children getting chopped up in factories and all that kind of stuff. Of course we gotta have a police force to stop those lunatics. And of course we have to have a justified police force to deal with all these black folks that want to be free, keep escaping. So from the very beginnings, this country has used all of its media apparatus to justify and promote this kind of nonsense. So by the time we get to what Ntume is talking about, with the technology being involved and the clarity, certainly, my whole field that I'm supposed to be credentialed in of mass communications research is literally founded by the ruling elite just for the purposes of studying how to psychologically manipulate people's public opinion. So this would, of course, have to include promoting a defense of a police force that, as Malcolm X was right in saying, does locally what the military does internationally. So then I'll stop here by talking about what I was talking about just even this morning. I'm just reading now Dr. Erica Edwards' work, The Other Side of Terror. And I think it's to the extent I understand it, it's brilliantly provocative in that she's arguing, among other things, that post-Second World War, as Mtume was talking about, you had an uptick in a need to promote blackness in films for the idea of convincing the whole world that, hey, even our formerly enslaved can do well in this country after we've settled the world wars and put American democracy on top of everything. Of course, this is great. And then after 9/11, Edwards is saying that we get another version of this where you have an increased role of black people playing part of the U.S. imperial process militarily. And she calls it the imperial grammars of blackness. Having people like Kerry Washington and people like James Earl Jones playing these high-ranking military officials and parading themselves and supporting the president and doing all of it. And this has been meant to have all of us come back into the confines of empire after we saw what happened on 9/11. And people might have started to raise the question about who, I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, you know, maybe they had to the extent we believe what the story is, that maybe it was, you know, there's some, you know, Ward Churchill was right. These were little Eichmanns in the trade towers. This is not some innocence. This is not an innocent country, you know, that, you know, so people might start asking questions, but no, we gotta bring it back. Now no, black people, you too. As long as we don't mistake you for having your head wrapped the wrong way, like you color folks start wrapping your hair, we can't distinguish, and we might snatch up a Hindi and think they're Muslim, but we don't really care. And if you black and just got a scarf on, maybe, I don't know, we might just scoop you up too. So you gotta bring them all back in. So you start seeing these brown figures in even shows like Homeland. You start finding black figures. When I just saw a thing where Alec Baldwin talked about The Hunt for Red October, and he was saying his first major breakthrough film. And they brought us to DC, and we were hanging out in the halls with the CIA so we could see how they really do this stuff. And then we just saw it went viral the other day. What's the name from Homeland? Said, yeah, we went in there and sat with the CIA as they wrote our scripts for the Showtime show. What was it? Of course we did. And then I will stop here. Alfred and Senger wrote in their book, and several others have come out since, that hundreds and thousands of U.S. TV and films are literally written by Pentagon officials, intelligence agencies, former cops, special ops. And then if you do watch any of the YouTube stuff, if you want to have some fun, watch the Special Forces YouTube channels right now. There's a whole collapse in the SEAL teams and the Delta, because all of their stories are being falsely told in the press and in the movies. All these movies, Lone Survivor, and even the SEAL teams are like, yo, that's not how it happened. This is all propaganda to hide the fact that we commit war crimes. So they created a whole movie to justify war crimes and called it Lone Survivor. None of that shit happened. Anyway, I'm sorry. So,
I see a question. Give me 1 second. Jared, as Jared loves to do, I asked Jared a question. He answers the question instead, not the question I asked. You know, forgot. You started talking, you forgot my question. How is this impacted in independent media, radio?
So I did. My favorite media projects have involved back in the day using the hip hop mixtape as an underground source of emancipatory journalism, turning the mixtape into a journalistic outlet. I did pirate radio in DC. I worked with the mighty WPFW, the black wing of Pacifica Radio in DC. One of the through problems, to try to answer this specific question that I think is an important one, is that one of the things that happens is people will be performing in these independent media spaces, even unconsciously hoping to perform in such a way that they get picked up by somebody else.
Right.
So you can start to see the slippage where you hear people who would, you know, the report should be something condemning this, and then all of a sudden it starts to sound a little bit like NPR, or a little bit like CNN, or a little bit So that's one thing. Then I don't know if I should say give the details publicly, so I'll start vague and we'll go from there. Years ago, I'm at this media reform conference where a lot of so-called independent, revolutionary-minded communications people used to want to claim that they were gathering to do something revolutionary, when they were all kind of like at the National Association of Black Journalists. They're really looking for jobs, they're really looking for connections, they're really looking for somebody with money to pick them up. And I'm sitting at the bar, that's where all the good stuff happens, and I'm talking to somebody who's a co-host of a very popular, supposedly left and independent outlet. And I'm saying, like for real, like off the record, like what's really going on? Because I pay attention, all of a sudden I'm not hearing a lot of stuff about imperialism and capitalism, and black and brown voices aren't popping up, and it's getting there's a lot of, not that the earth doesn't need saving, but there's a lot of environmental stuff all of a sudden. And he told me, that's where the money is. And so that I work with is not gonna go buck with the money. So we're gonna do more stories. It's gonna be a whole bunch of stories about that. And all the stuff about Cop Watch and this stuff and this, it's just gonna start to go down with it. So I just think that's one way it happens. It's a very insidious, even unconscious, slick, subtle invitation. So don't you want to have a bigger audience? Don't you want to have? It's kind of like the lesser evil voting parallel. You can't win with the Greens and the PSL, and so you gotta support the lesser of evil. And it's kind of like the same thing with media, where you can't get that huge audience unless you start sounding. But then what's the point of having a big audience if you say the same stuff? That's the whole. So that's the truth. So I'll stop here by saying I did learn a lot from the late great Glenn Ford at Black Agenda Report. And one of the things that he used to always teach was that the goal is not to replace mass media or become mass media. Our goal is to target activists, academics, journalists, artists who want to be involved in political organization, and to give them something that helps them improve and expand their work. And I think that should be the goal of media makers as we try to resist all those limitations and temptations.
I just want to point out for the record that that's why I asked him that question. Do you want to ask your question? Because I'm going to cover the written media part. But
Yes, I actually do. And maybe I'll ask the question and then you can decide if it's like something that you talk about after the video part. But I think I just want to bring it. Well, first, I really like how you guys like talk about the inception of like media being for propaganda. Because in my head, it just makes me understand like in the Constitution things like the right to free press. It's not necessarily like the right to free press, but it's the right for like certain people to have free press to talk about certain things. Because like our free press has always been like degraded, and that's why like we've had to have like, even since like post enslavement, like early Reconstruction, we had to have our own forms of like, journalism, because like our freedom to press has like not been acknowledged. But I think I want to bring this back like to a younger audience, because obviously they're not. But I'm like to bring in the context and like that intergenerational conversation. We don't watch the news. You know what I mean? A lot of us don't watch the news. We're not reading articles. We don't read the newspaper. We're on TikTok, Twitter, X, whatever, Instagram, YouTube, whatsoever. Say this to say that, like, obviously, when you make the point that, like, all media is kind of state-run media, but, marketed as, like, independent, but obviously we have, like, wealthy people funneling into, like, those media pockets. But, like, now we live in a day and age where, like, wealthy people own our form of media. Like, you have Elon Musk owning Twitter, which is our form of media, versus Elon Musk pushing, money into CNN. And now you have like with the whole TikTok ban where it went black, and then, it just went back up yesterday. And then like the first thing that comes up is like TikTok says, we thank Donald Trump.
President Trump.
Yeah, we thank Donald Trump for like, supporting TikTok and putting us back up, blah, blah, blah. I say this to say that like, never, if before was there like state-run media so like blatant in our face like it is now. And then like you also talk about like how people lean because of the money. Like we know this just from influencers alone, quote unquote political influencers, Like we'll see them talking about one thing and like they're so, you know, pro-abortion rights, pro this, pro that, and then all of a sudden their content starts to like switch and be like more like right leaning. And you know, I guess the question is like in this age of like mass information that is now coupled with like government like authoritarianism, because Elon Musk is in the cabinet of the presidency now, and Donald Trump has brokered some type of deal that has allowed TikTok to like stay open. How do we protect ourselves from like misinformation, and like how do we also be like a voice of like independent journalism, and like how, I guess it's like there's just so much going on. How do we get to the truth, like, and all of that, and also how do we spread the truth and all of that? So that is.
Ooh, I should have made you wait. No, so, all right. So I'm actually gonna let Intune. I know I'm starting with you, but let me just talk a little bit about written journalism. And I write for a small outlet called Public Square Amplified, and one of the first articles that I wrote for that outlet was that policing cannot exist in a democratic society. That was the first article that I wrote. Written news is very, very tricky because once it's written, it's there, right? You can't undo it, right? Even in this day and age of video and all of those things, like, there might be ways to figure out how to pull something down and erase it and all those things, but if something has been printed and it exists somewhere, you can't undo that printing, right? Written media is, to me, one of the strongest forms of propaganda because it follows the narrative that is written by police, right? And even when they determined that the storyline that was provided by the police was incorrect, they almost never correct it. So you'll get, you know, to this day, if that young lady didn't give her phone up, we would have thought that George Floyd died because he had some kind of episode, right? Like that was the police report that was released to the press, okay? And this is consistent across the board, across the country, across the world in some cases, right? What gets printed and released is the initial story that is told to the press by the police, okay? And often even you will find there's a historical story, a hysterical story about the group after the game, and the Zionists were somewhere else and they chased in Amsterdam, and they chased these people down and they beat, right? And all the reports made it seem as if the Zionists had been under attack. And what we found out was it AP, whatever the body is that holds the initial source, right? They intentionally mislabeled the video, even though the person who took the video called them and said, this is not correct, right? So the wrong story went out. And this is consistently what happens. Consistently what happens. Because the goal is to give you the story they want you to have. Right? The goal is not to give you the story. The goal is to give you the story they want you to have. Right? So you always have to remember whenever you are looking at things, reading things, listening to things, right? Unfortunately, youngin, it is on you to go beyond the story that you were taught. Right? As our beloved, as he always says, you always repeat, you must read, beloved. Right? You have to. There's no way around it because the goal is to keep you on the hamster wheel, right? And with the storyline and the narrative that is being fed to you. And then if you just take it in without making any attempt to learn something different, all you're ever going to know is what they want you to know, right? And even on social media, right? It is still whatever the social media platform wants you to know. So that's why you're getting the person who previously said one thing and now is saying something else, right? It's intentional because they want you to be like, oh, well, this person changed their mind. Maybe I should think about changing my mind. it's not, it's not about them, right? It's about making sure they maintain the audience the way they want it to be maintained. So I'm gonna pass it, right? Because that wasn't really, I didn't really want to answer that question, but I felt like as a former educator, I should at least say, you must read.
No, what Renee, I think, is bringing up is really important because, and I think my colleagues here agree, one of the things about the internet is people don't often ask who is their primary source for the information that they're giving out. Most of the people, on the internet aren't investigative reporters, right? Or if they're investigating from like sources that they got from places like the AP, so forth and so on. So a lot of times we're not asking that question, right? Who are these people? Now, some of them, I'm not gonna say everyone on the internet is like that. There are some people who I think do really great journalism, and they have, great journalistic practices, but they're few and far between. And if there's one bit of advice, maybe we should be asking, well, where did you get your sources from? Where are you getting that stuff? Another thing that I want to throw out here, though, is finance capital is necessary to have a relationship to do imperialism. Imperialism needs finance capital. Monopoly capital is part of it. A lot of times when people think imperialism, they just think military. But no, if you go back to Lenin, right, it is about capitalism. It is about making monopoly capital. It's about finding a way to go into a certain sector of the world, extract its resources, and then use military and force when necessary so you can hoard the resources and bring it back to whatever, imperialist nation is doing that practice. So what Musk, Zuckerberg, all of them, this is imperialism, right? This is if you looked up on that stage today and you saw that is monopoly capital saying, look, we got a problem. We have an issue. The issue is East, one of the issues for them, right? Is that country called China. We can get into that. And, and they're like, hey, we got a problem. We need to band together, right, as monopoly capital. And when they talk about monopoly capital being an agreement amongst people to have a monopoly amongst each other, right? They're going to have a thing amongst each other. They're going to hoard these resources and it's going to be around people. So if there's like $1 billion, they're going to get, 890, million of it, and there'll be another little bit to their other little friends, and then we'll get like $2, right? And that's how it works, right? They want to monopolize it, right? And that's where in this media space with the things like that, they want you to be so beloved to these products, to these social media apparatuses. Some of it is also beyond our control. They're making it to a certain level that you have to use these apps to do everything that you do, right? I mean, if anything is not imperialist and really and undemocratic, it's the fact that you have to use devices and all this stuff to make basic entries, right? You have to use clouds to actually host and have your stuff, and you gotta pay somebody for it. I mean, that's absurd. I have to pay someone to basically host my information that you extract from me. I mean, this is a really parasitic relationship. It is completely unjust, right? But it's all about looting, right? And then when the propaganda comes in, it's the main part of the propaganda to me, and I know there's other things, but is to getting you to believe that you have to have them, that these things are good. The thing about the TikTok thing that I find so fascinating is how much has been botched. On some levels, you got young people going, China, man, maybe they weren't that bad, right? You do have some of that. But then you also have some people who are like, we can't lose it, right? And Trump's going to give it back to us. And what does that mean, right? And then you have Democrats say, well, it's really Biden who gave it back to you. And you're like, what is happening here? This is absolutely absurd. But it goes to show you our kind of devoted nature to products and to apparatuses. And it's something we have to question, I think, as people. But this goes back to the kind of everything with mass media, from movies. Our identities are formed through apps, movie characters. I'm an MCU person. Like, what does that mean? Does it really mean anything, right? But you're forming your identity through these things. And if you're going to get taken away from you, that's what gets us upset. Not the fact that the minute you open Facebook, they're actually literally extracting data from you that they're using to make money and then undeveloping societies and peoples and communities around the world. That doesn't make us that upset. And I'm not blaming people, we just simply don't know that. We haven't been taught this concept around, and Jared talks about this a lot. We haven't talked about this concept that they actually owe us. They owe us. We don't owe them nothing. I don't owe Dropbox $10 a month to do my Dropbox owes me, right? And that's what Jared always talks about, right? And that's the thing that I think we have to think about.
And by the way, that's also why I don't give a damn, and they get no credit. I don't care. The people in the family can do it, but I don't give a damn that Biden pardoned Garvey. I don't give a damn that he let Leonard out. He doesn't deserve any credit for that. That is way past due. They already owe us. Leonard and his family can be apologetic and grateful. I have the privilege that I don't have to do that because I'm already out here didn't suffer like that. I'm saying damn Biden for it because they already owe us. And I just reposted a video about the right to be lazy, the Marxist Lafargue article from the 19th century. We have a right to be lazy. We already did all the work. But one thing I just want to add very quickly to specific to your question, I do think we are in a civilizational crisis of methodology. And one of the things that you said does actually kind of terrify me. It's not that so much that you're, and it is because I do disagree with one of the points that you were making about this era being truly different in terms of ownership and dissemination of information. I don't really agree with that. There is the private ownership and direct manipulation of our media has always been an issue. What is more difficult for your generation, this is where your generation of students that end up in my classrooms this is where it becomes more difficult. The process by which this information is disseminated is more convoluted. So a lot of my students will say what you just said. Oh, I don't watch CNN. I get my news from Twitter. But the people you're watching on Twitter got their frame of analysis from CNN, even if they don't know it. That's the other thing. So some of my students will come in, like the conservative ones. I don't watch CNN. I watch Tim Pool. Well, that silly white boy gets all of his stuff from Fox, Wall Street Journal, semi-articles that he reads, the headline maybe, and Post, so it is still working. And those who are in charge of these processes, the heads of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, the reason what's his name, Murdoch bought the Wall Street Journal back in the day wasn't because he knew I'm going to lose money. The point isn't to make money. The point is to manipulate the leaders within the financial community who will disseminate a narrative through all of their subsidiaries that reflects my interests, and nobody's even going to be aware of it. Because they don't read the Wall Street Journal, but they damn sure get that Wall Street Journal analysis from their favorite YouTuber and their favorite podcaster who did read a portion of an article or watched whatever and then distills it through something else. So I do think it is important to follow the steps, be part of organizations, be part of collectives, because none of us can beat this by ourselves. I was just telling him before we got started, he's 2 for 2 in messing me up on films that I walked home thinking I liked. And I'm supposed to be the scholar. I'm the critical scholar who's always hating on everything. And as soon as I walk out of a movie, I'm like, finally, they got. And he's like, nah, bro. So you can't do this by yourself. That's really
talking about how like the commodification of data and digitally commodifying the space and kind of colonizing that idea of like putting people like radical identities on the internet and then placing these middlemen. Like Amazon doesn't sell any products, it's a middleman. DoorDash doesn't have any restaurants, it's a middleman. Instagram doesn't have any information, it's also a middleman. So they are just putting these middlemen in between you and the ideas so that they could filter in what they want and filter out what they don't want. What I wanted to talk to is that I love coffee, I love Black Caesar, I love all these Friday, hello, like I love that movie. I still sit and watch that movie and laugh. How do you love that media while also recognizing how, like, Friday put us back decades. Like, that was not. I watched that movie and I was like, oh my God, it's so funny, but it's like people really thought that this was how, And it's funny and I love it, but it's bad. It's bad.
Just quickly, because I named it after what I used to deliver pizza with, the Vernon philosophy of black media avoidance. And the point is, Vernon once said to me, I'm not going to ever see a movie with black people in it because they always make us look bad. And at the time, I thought that was crazy. Then I went into ridiculous amounts of debt, read a bunch of stuff to realize he was right in the back of the pizza shop we were delivering pizzas about 30 years ago.
You need to be
I didn't even I just regularly did all this stuff for no reason. But the real point is to borrow from another professor I always quote, is that we should always question how do we know what we know and why do we like what we like. The point isn't to be critical of I liked Friday, I like these things. I don't want to we shouldn't beat ourselves up. The point is they are spending endless amounts of money researching every way to manipulate our public opinion. They will find ways to find something you're going to like. They're going, whatever you like, they're going to find a way to give it to you. So the question is, what I always try to do is work backwards. When I watch something and I enjoy it and I like it, and as soon as I stop laughing, wipe my tears, whatever emotion they get from me, I get angry at the manipulation. I recognize, okay, if they've made me laugh or cry or feel angry, then they've been successful. So I just have to recognize, oh, they got me. The problem is when I don't recognize it, and I have to wait for him to see the film to tell me that no, that you what you think you liked was a manipulation of something that they know is of interest to you. So the goal is to find. It's the same way they do with the food, where they call it the sugar. It's the sugar principle or something. The exact point where the exact amount of sugar to put into a drink or a meal so that you will love it and become addicted to it without it being seen as too sweet. Mm-hmm. So in the same way that they make Doritos to attack all of our senses so that we never forget that chip, they intentionally put the residue on there so that we have to lick our fingers. They have the sound engineered so it sounds a certain way. It looks bright and colorful. They put all of that into a damn chip. So obviously, if it's a commercial or a movie or a news report or a film, or they're going to put at least that much energy and effort and billions of dollars and decades of research into finding a way. Man, Jared needs to see a movie with this light-skinned chubby dude who goes through a crisis over his career. And we'll call it American fiction, and we'll get this movie. We'll get him. And then I walk out the movie telling everybody, oh, you gotta see it, it's the best movie ever. Black people finally have a film that they can go and appreciate. And then he's like, no, man, this is a black bourgeoisie apologetic film. Yeah. You didn't see that, Jeff? What's wrong with you?
I didn't say it like that.
That's how I heard it. And that's what I needed to hear. Because even, quote unquote, even me, my point is we all need help. We all need help. They're going to find that movie that you want to
They have found it.
I know they found it, all of that stuff. We like all of that stuff. And that's it. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. So the way that Entume ruins movies for Jared has ruined Netflix for me. So he can be mad at Entume because I'm mad at both of them. So this is like I can't watch anything without thinking of how Jared is about to ruin whatever it is that I watch. So thank you for that. My suggestion to you is to embrace your contradiction.
Yeah.
Right? Embrace your it's okay, right? We live in a capitalist society in which you literally have to work yourself to death in order to live. We are living contradictions.
The ones who live heaven now are telling us to believe that heaven isn't on earth.
Right. So this is part of recognizing that we are living in a place where everything is set up to be difficult. So you are so focused on the difficulties of your life that you can't fix all the shit that's wrong. Okay? It's literally set up that way. So embrace it. As long as you recognize that it's a contradiction, I think for me it's okay. Right? There's only but so much. Right? We're surrounded. Literally surrounded. There's only so much we can do, right? Like I try my best. I don't go to Starbucks, but I'm not gonna stop drinking coffee, right? I can't guarantee that if I go somewhere and I accept a cup of coffee from somebody that it's not gonna be from Starbucks, because not everybody's like me, right? I can't tell my husband, don't go eat a Chick-fil-A when you're not with me, because I don't eat a Chick-fil-A, right? So So these are the things, right? But my husband's also mad at me because I still watch Netflix, and he's been mad since they released that cartoon, the remake of Good Times. He has not opened Netflix since they released that thing, and my husband's white. Okay, and every time he sees me watching Netflix, he'll be like, they give me the side eye, right? So this is our living contradiction. Because I'm like, baby, you got me down here editing all these goddamn videos. I need something like I need a series on so that I can have something. I accept my contradictions, right?
And they are. I'm allowed to.
And like you are allowed, accept your contradiction. We're gonna have to wrap soon, but I want to ask one last question, and this is for you both. Well, I'll answer it first, and then I'll let you two. The question is, the battle that comes with being a person who points out propaganda. Right? How do you continue? Because it is a benefit to society, in my opinion, that you have not stopped making films, even though you've accepted that you're not going to be a billionaire off of it, right? That you refuse to do something that is outside of what matters on your YouTube channel, even though you could probably, because you're pretty fucking funny, you could probably make a lot more, right? Jared and I do a weekly show. Listen. It's a thing, right? I fall down these rabbit holes. This is like the curse of my life. I see something, I'm like, well, what the fuck is this about? And then I start researching, then 3 hours goes by and I have a spreadsheet. I don't really know how it happens, this is what happens. So I share the spreadsheet. This is what we do on Saturdays, right? And every now and again, Jared will be like, you should just start a new channel. No. Like, I don't have it in me. I don't want to do it. We just had this conversation like 3 days ago. I don't really want to do it because I have no interest in making money off of the work, right? The map that is on the advertisement for this is my map, right? But if you go to the website to look at the map, you have no idea that I'm the person that made it because I have no interest in telling people I'm the person who made it. Right? So Jared gets mad at me all the time because I don't get credit. And I'm like, well, they probably don't know who the fuck I am, so they can't give me credit because my name's not anywhere on the thing, right? Because my goal was to provide information. But I have accepted that I am not going to be a person who's going to become super popular, super rich, and I don't want to. That is not my goal, right? My goal is to bring people in a room who are interested in learning and breaking their propaganda, breaking the thing that everything wants you to believe this life is, and going home and saying to somebody else, yo, this crazy lady, let me just tell you the story she told, right? But everything I tell you is true, right? That's what I want. So if all of you leave here and you go tell 1 or 2 other people something that you learned in this room, you have done the exact thing that I seek to do with my time. Right? So that's what keeps me going, is knowing that of all of you, probably 1 or 2 of you are going to tell a story, maybe more, about something that you heard today, and you were going to change somebody else's mind about what policing propaganda is about. That's the point. Okay? Who wants to go first?
That's hard to follow.
How would I phrase this the best way? So, I left more opportunities that were probably more lucrative because fundamentally they didn't seem liberatory, or they weren't liberatory. And what do I mean by that? A movie that I made, both of them, I don't know if Renee's watched it yet, a movie called Thief by Michael Mann. And at the end of the film, not to give you the end, what James Caan realizes is that even though he's making a ton of money, there's still someone above him who at the snap of a finger can tell him, you work for me, and if you don't, I'll murder your whole family. the guy literally says to him, right? So that film always reminds me of capitalism, getting a whole tons of money, especially if you're a black person, right, from a subaltern past or whatever they call it, like, you're not gonna get no liberation trying to like stack up tons and tons and tons. At the end of the day, someone will reel you in when they have to. And liberation has always been something that's been important to me as a black person, right? Reading Malcolm, reading Huey, reading all of my heroes and heroines, right? I'm like, yo, like, how do I become liberated? So being a part of the project of liberation, to me, is of utmost importance. Because, and this kind of goes into what you were asking about viewership. There's a great essay by Tomás Gutiérrez Alea, the great Cuban filmmaker and theorist. He has this great essay called The Viewer's Dialectic. And he talks about viewership, and he talked about how viewing has to also be trained, right? Not just how to make a film, but how to actually view, how to be an audience member. I was talking to a comrade, she was in Cuba last year, and she said one of the most powerful things she had with Cuban folks was how they knew how to politically engage. And she asked, she was like, how are y'all so politically like wise? And everybody's like, that's what we're taught. We are developed. So viewership is a developmental thing, right? Because enjoyment, look, you can get enjoyment from a cookie. You can get enjoyment from a fig, anything. You can get an odd enjoyment from somebody slipping on the ground, right? It happens, right? Enjoyment isn't the only thing that's happening to you when you're watching a film, when you're watching TikTok, whatever. There are many things that are happening. So in the viewer's dialectic, you have to go through a series of acknowledgments and understand the contradictions, that enjoyment can't actually be the only graph that you take in when you're looking at something. Because also enjoyment has to be where you're at in the moment. You can be really depressed, right? And then think about addicts. Think about anybody. Think about people who get into gambling. I had a cousin who had a gambling addiction. He said when he would go gamble, it was because he was at his lowest emotionally. So he would do something that made him feel, rush to go up. So part of your dialectic, you have to understand why you're doing this. Why do you go back into that? And we have to educate each other. And to me, that was really important. Me going out, educating people, and developing also theorems and practices and methodologies on how people should view films. Black people interested in revolution. What films have utility? What films have no utility at all? What films have maybe certain types of utilities, and we can talk about them, right? But there is a lot that we must do as people. It's not just about I like this and that's it, and I don't like this and that's it. There's a lot that goes into your own development, right, that we have to acknowledge, right? And to me, that's where I sit. I sit in this space of how can I create liberatory work? How can I help people look for liberation, right? And then also demand it. Say, you know what, this stuff is not suitable. These movies, these pieces of media that they're releasing, this does not speak to me, and we need something better. So then artists who claim, and some of them are probably telling the truth, that they're about you as audience people, they respect you, will create things and make things that really are about speaking to you, your liberatory possibilities, so forth and so on.
Right on. I don't know how to answer this question at all, really. But part of it is I was going over in my head. I just think it sounds. So part of it, part of what allows me to do what I do is because of the way I was raised, the way I was politicized, the way I was raised with maybe not some perfect elements included. So I have no problem. I've learned or been conditioned to accept certain levels of isolation and marginalization. So if I'm taking a political position that doesn't go with the mainstream, it's kind of easy at this point. Or evolved is easy for me. And when I realized, and I saw early on, that yes, we all have, not all of us, some of us will get invitations at various points in our lives I've talked about it in terms of my biraciality and being invited to whiteness, or to Renee's point, being invited to, you know, hey, you might have some skill and talent if you would just, you know, put on a tie and say this and that. You might, and then just like, no. I mean, I remember telling people, I'm not wearing a tie. I just will not wear ties. I see men in ties as just fully capitulated and given it, and it's not a judgment. I just see it that way. I don't know why. I mean, it's just something that evolved in me. I see a tie, it's like, and you know, I just see it in the news. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, but some of my favorite. I mean, Malcolm X always wore a tie. John Henrik Clark, I did my master's thesis on, always in a tie. Most African-centered dude in the most Eurocentric outfits, always. He never was quote unquote African clothes. But the point is, I was just even then. I'm like, but ultimately, why I'm in spaces like this, why I was happy to want to drive up here, and I want to be in spaces like this, because this is where I find my community. This is where I find my social life. So when I'm in spaces like this and I take an unpopular political position, the worst thing that's likely to happen is some pushback and disagreement. We have a little argument. But there's not going to be, for the most part, this, oh, he didn't like Friday, so we can't talk to him anymore. Or he didn't like, you know, scandal, so we can't talk to him anymore. Like, you know, or I don't have to, or it's kind of like what the Palestinian sister was saying earlier. I'm not in spaces where I have to deal with Zionists and people who exclusively love Tyler Perry movies. Like, I just don't have to do it. I don't do it. Exactly. Well, I mean, yeah. To me, they're just as bad as Zionism, Tyler Perry. It's like 1A. It's like
Venn diagram. That's for sure.
I used to joke when they put black people on the trains to our version of Auschwitz in the near future. They're gonna have Tyler Perry. We're gonna be in the trains chilling, watching Tyler Perry. So it's like, oh, this is great. Where we going? It's about to be great. So ultimately, that's why I think spaces like this, being at least adjacent to political organization, is selfish in the sense that it creates community, it creates a political and a media environment that is sustaining and supportive. And so when I am in other spaces and not following the mainstream and feeling that isolation or marginalization, it's okay, because I know I have these spaces, which is ultimately the only spaces I would want to be seen as having value to anyway. But yeah,